Thank you again for the invitation. My name is Uroš Marušič. I will be presenting today some preliminary data as well. Why is that? Just a disclosure, perhaps at the beginning. It was 2 years ago when we established our Slovenian mobile brain body imaging lab, and also the work that you've seen right now from presenting by Mansa. It's our first clinical study, so that's why perhaps things are a bit too early to conclude, but anyway, just to show you where we're going and what we are dealing with. So I modulated a bit our title. It's kind of like in the decreased and increased gravitational gradients. And why is that? You'll see in a bit. So we just finalized also a bed rest campaign, which is the simulation of microgravity on Earth. So if we think about neuroplasticity, I think during this Congress we've heard and we will be hearing a lot of it, about it. And this brain or adaptation of the brain to new environments or conditions, it's a remarkable opportunity to learn new skills, to adapt to certain things. Even if we have an injury, we adapt quite quickly on that. And if we check how the gravity shapes our central nervous system, it doesn't do it directly, but indirectly, you know it from the first steps that the kid makes until when we become very old or tired, that we feel this gravity more and more. And the question here was, I don't know why it's going automatically. I think it's time to move on. There are big concerns. So if we are a bit futuristic and we think about future flights, and it's not the future, so Virgin company does it. If you pay, you go to space now. These are concerns about the safety of those space missions to Moon and Mars and beyond. So if we think about it, how we feel or how we sense this gravity. So Klaus was already explaining why it's important to adopt MoBI methodology and to think and to understand that basically our human behavior in the natural conditions. But we have these otolith organs that are sensing this gravity. It's part of our vestibular system, so it's interconnected. And as it was shown before, we sense, or it works in tandem also with visual proprioceptives and also spatial perception. So we need to take it holistically. If we move our head towards, if we tilt it, you'll see later on, you see that when we are walking, for instance, and typing on the phone, our head is tilted. So the gravity is influencing here our senses again. If I go forward, and if we think about some very basic things that Newton was thinking years ago about it and made the second Newton's law. In the static conditions, Mansa was showing you how we adapt or how we sense these gravity changes. So if we sway back and forth, you basically can calculate from the center of gravity your center of pressure, and this is the body sway that you do it in pretty static conditions. If we move forward, then we walk up and down. We are constantly changing these gravitational gradients while we move through the space. And if we measure even by our smartphone or inertial measurement unit, you'll see that these gravity levels keep changing up and down, but we are used to those changes, so we don't feel it and we don't perceive it as pretty different. But we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, right? So that's why I guess you learned now why we need this MoBI technology and get into background or neurophysiology of our movement. The question is here, what happens in the prolonged exposure to either increased or decreased gravitational levels on Earth, and how we can do it? How does this influence our central nervous system functioning? I see it pretty well here. Here it's cut, so sorry for that. But the picture, it's showing you the first model that introduces us with the different gravitational transitions. So we have the Airbus which goes up. So you see approximately, so it flies on the 5,000 meters. Then it goes up for 20 seconds, increasing. So you have the hypergravity of approximately 1.8 g. And then you have approximately 22 seconds of microgravity that you can measure whatever you want. And then again, hypergravity and 1 g again. And this flies in parabolas. So this is quite an experimental design that is being used for many years now, simulating either increased or decreased gravitational levels. Second one that I want to talk today about is the human centrifuge. So if we place a human inside the human centrifuge, one of these was installed in Planica last year. I'll show you in a bit the results. And here the question is how this influences central nervous system when we increase the gravity, so the G levels. And the third model to reduce the G level, although we don't reduce it, just position the vertical acceleration when we are lying in bed. So that's the so-called bed rest model. And that's the microgravity simulation and also the aging process. So I'll show you just the results of what we have so far from all three models. That's Ramona, our colleague, who started also parabolic flight campaigns. And what they discovered, or how you see this thing happening, is this basically plane goes into the hypergravity and then into microgravity for 22 seconds, for instance. So you see here how subjects are getting this. You see subjects behind, like, performing different maneuvers, and you can measure a bunch of things. And lately, or recently, EEG was introduced to understand what's happening basically during certain cognitive tasks, when they are solving cognitive tasks in microgravity, for instance. What they found out was not that surprising to me, so no effects on motor performance. They said that overall they could see some increased beta activity during the flight, but most probably these short transitions are reflecting more or less these arousal levels, so how the participants are feeling during these exposures, and not so much how they would feel in the space. And actually that was also summarized by our review paper, my first paper that I published in 2014, where we also saw that from multiple campaigns, you cannot get a proper view of what's happening with the brain, basically in this short and very let's say very fast transitions of G levels. So that's why we moved forward to the second level. So on the second layer, I show you some data from the increased gravitational levels. So that's a project we started together with Adam McDonald and Igor Mekiavic from Institute Jožef Stefan. The plan was basically to execute all the measurements in May this year. Due to technical and some personal reasons of Adam, we needed to postpone that to next March, so March 2024, but we collected already some data that I'm going to show to you in a sec. On the right side, you see the new project that I obtained also from the European Union, and they have a bit different perspective at Aristoteles University in Thessaloniki, where they're using this human centrifuge for medical purposes. So also this, I have a couple of slides about it. So how this works, the human centrifuge, basically you spin participants around, and it depends where you position them. Of course, then the different G's are being induced. And also it's much easier to perceive these increased gravitational levels if your head is closer to the center of rotation. The further you go, the higher the G levels, and also the motion sickness becomes more serious. The basic principle of centrifuge, I think you know it. So we use for the separation of different materials. So the heavier material goes down, but we don't want to get this in humans, of course. What we want to kind of like experience is the higher gravitational gradient. So resisting towards this centrifugal and centripetal force that it's occurring while we spin the participants around. How this centrifuge can be constructed, there are different models, and the B shows our model here in Planica. So we have this short arm human centrifuge. And the idea of this project was to see the feasibility of whether we can do some measurements inside. So if you can imagine, we are spinning participants pretty fast. There are lots of artifacts happening during this centrifugation. So we were wondering if we can get any insights or we won't see anything in the end. Since we are in Slovenia, I need to mention that it was pretty fascinating when I learned about it. Herman Potočnik Nordung, he wrote a book about traveling in space. Back in 1928 it was published, and he already introduced the human centrifuge. So in the space, when we will be traveling in the space, for instance, one of the opportunities to have like 1G, as we have it on Earth, would be to create a huge centrifuge and then induce these gravitational gradients. So human centrifuge, so far what we know pretty well what's happening with our body how it's deconditioning during prolonged periods of bed rest. So when you're staying in bed for a certain amount of days, your body deteriorates, or you're losing not only muscle mass, but also muscle strength and other abilities. Your brain and central nervous system adapts to that very fast. Some of the results will be presented in a bit. We also know that this short arm human centrifuge can be implemented as a countermeasure. So when people are resting or spending in bed or being hospitalized, if you centrifuge them, they won't be losing that much as they would being completely passive. And also it helps to improve the orthostatic tolerance or intolerance, ability to intolerate this gravity again when you stand up on the feet. So what's happening or how we envision that? On this video you can see, and I was in Thessaloniki a month ago, where you see like two patients being centrifuged. So there are multiple sclerosis patients. They are not able to move anymore or stand on their feet, but they are kind of like one of them you could see it's exercising, the other one is being just spinned, so basically increasing the cardiovascular responses and at the same time feeling that the pressures they would be standing, although they cannot. They claim, and also it was published, that there are some medical benefits of these centrifuges as well. If we take a look to Planica, so that's the region where we measure, where we have this project in the mountains here in Slovenia. What we did was preparing the subject with 128 channels. The paradigm was presented by Mansa before, and it was the Stroop task. We spinned several participants. The results are being presented only by my colleague, Luca. So you can see here how MoBI technology is being implemented. Why I'm saying MoBI, because it's not only EEG, but we have also the heart rate variability. Here's the high density EMG collected from 64 channels. And we have here the subject spinning around with 128 channels also of EEG on the head. Here's our equipment being streamed wirelessly while we are centrifuging. The question was, are we able to get anything out of it? How the EEG will be kind of like reacting to that? And since it's wireless streaming, so do we lose any information? Ended up, so here are some behavioral outcomes that we were analyzing. So, of course, when you spin the participants into different G levels, so it's a baseline, then the 0.7, 1.4 G, you see that there is an increase in the beats per minute, so you feel this gravity very severely. And even if you want to do some squats during being centrifuged, then you see that the increases are so there are even more significant increases in heart rate, heartbeat. From the EEG and ERP perspective, not so much, or how the EEG data looks like. During centrifuging, This is the raw data, basically during baseline and then during responding. Not that bad, I would say, when we were analyzing all the EEG during walking or even running. When you just apply high pass and low pass filtering, it does look even nicer. I don't see it. Okay, it disappeared. And from the ERP perspective, so what we see here, some preliminary results that we don't want to conclude that much. There are specific differences happening on the occipital lobe, comparing these conditions, so worth reading, the easiest one, ink naming as well, and then the switching, the red one, which would be presumably reflect the most demanding task that reflects a higher amplitude. So far, I could not see any differences between, let's say, between different G levels. So on the single subject analysis, we can say we can nicely extract the ERPs. So baseline ERPs look very similar to the 1.7 G ERPs. Also from the motor-related cortical potential, I was able to extract the information. So you see the depolarization of the CZ electrode and then going the repolarization again after the click occurred. So when they were responding during being centrifuged, so during increased gravitational levels. So that confirms the feasibility and somehow the ability of our lab to measure these neurophysiological adaptations during increased gravitational levels. So last thing to show you is the results of the bed rest campaigns. As you can see here, the bed rest, as I mentioned previously, is a simulation of a microgravity. So we reduce the gravity gradients, not completely, but participants are not allowed to stand up, and they do all the oral hygiene or the daily activities, basically in supine condition. So this modeling was induced in 1960s by NASA, and then later on in Soviet Union. Today we have at least 5 centers around the globe performing these bed rest campaigns, and one of them is ours. So my colleague started in 2001, and we were going up. So I started my PhD with 2012, conducting another bed rest campaign in 2019, and actually today we finalized the 2023 bed rest campaign. What is interesting here to observe? What's happening, or why this 0G or prolonged exposure to bed rest is kind of like, how does it harm the human body? If we take the perspective first from the muscle perspective, you see if you place the participant in space and if this subject spends in 0G approximately half a year, he will or she will lose approximately 20% of postural muscle mass just by being in the space, since there is no mechanical loading. That's pretty similar what we see in the aging process throughout, let's say, 50 years of age. Of course, if you don't do exaggerated physical activity as we want to, but the normal aging brings approximately 25% of deterioration in those 50 or 52 or 55 years. And pretty similar to the space flight, you can see the bed rest campaign in, let's say, half a year, you'll lose also perhaps approximately 20% of your muscle mass, of your postural muscles, in this case, knee extensors, okay? So those are the muscles who are working pretty hard right now that I'm just resisting and standing here in front of you. What was interesting to observe back then, before my times at the Institute, was the drop that happens at the muscular level. So at the muscular level, there was approximately a drop of 10%, but if we compare it to the power, muscular power, so the strength that the muscles could produce, and here we are talking about the central nervous system and how the spinal, the supraspinal mechanisms are controlling that knee extension, maximal knee extension. You could see twice as big. So comparing muscle mass loss to muscle force or power, the power deteriorates with the percentage of 2 to 100 basically. So twice as much as we lose the muscle, so how much muscle atrophies. And why is that? We didn't know that moment, so I conducted a systematic review together with my colleagues, so Marko Narici, Boštjan, Rado, and Ramona. What we found out from the systematic screening of the literature was that, the graphic I showed you before, that there is a drop of muscle mass with this fashion, and twice as much, approximately, the muscle strength of the same muscles, so knee extensor strength versus knee extensor atrophy. And here is the bed rest days, so how many days participants spent in bed from 0 to 120, and then the percentage of how much they lost during that days. So, for instance, in 20 days of bed rest, so if you are placed in bed for 20 days, you will lose approximately 7% or let's say 8% of your muscle mass and 15 to 16% of your muscle strength. What's even more important here was that when we were comparing and trying to understand what's happening here behind the scenes, was that in the first 20 days there is a huge drop, or actually a huge importance of the central nervous system. So the ratio, how much this strength deteriorates compared to the muscle atrophy, is 4 times bigger, and then it drops after 20 days to, let's say, to the ratio of 2. So after that, it doesn't matter how much time you spent in bed, the ratio of how much you will lose from the muscle strength or mass stays stable. So that's why we started thinking, and we did an additional analysis, which is called meta-regression, which showed that we were able to explain by muscle atrophy approximately 76% of variance. The 25%, or let's say 1/4 approximately, we can say that that's part of the other factors. Among them is also the supraspinal changes that we are studying very precisely right now. So we want to understand how the central nervous system adapts to that period, and why this happens during these early days when the healthy subjects in this case, or perhaps also hospitalized patients, deteriorate that fast. What we've done back then was that we were checking if we can trick somehow the brain with a specific intervention. In this case, these participants spent in bed 14 days, completely physically inactive, but at the same time, 1 hour per day, they were solving these virtual mazes. So they were traveling, or they were virtually walking through the mazes. I constructed those mazes, so they needed to understand or to remember what was the path and find the trophy in the end. So their brain stayed active throughout those 14 days of completely physically being inactive. What we found out from the muscle perspective, nothing significant. So the muscle deteriorated in the same way in both groups, so muscle atrophy was there as we expected. The muscle function then was very much affected by this intervention. So those who were active during 14 days of bed rest, they showed better results in the end, specifically here in the dual task effects, in gait speed and gait variability measure. If we move forward to the brain, so that moment I didn't know Klaus and his group, so I didn't know about MoBI technology and how to measure EEG during movement, so we compared just pre and post results. And we did some ERP analysis, performing the sensory motor task, showing on the screen a simple reaction time task, and then the subjects needed to react on that. What we found out, in summary, was that the intervention group didn't change much, but the latency of peak to 300, this is shown on the occipital level, was shorter. So the red dotted line shows you that the peak to 100 was basically being reduced, so they were faster at the end of those 14 days. In comparison to the control group, which showed the increases in the amplitudes, both peak 100 and peak 200 amplitude, and also reduction of peak 200 latency, but with less or lower effect size. Showing us that we actually still don't know what's happening during that period, because we were expecting or hypothesizing that we will see some prolongation of those latencies. Although they are shortening in the end. Could be learning effect or repeating this task twice. Although here we had also important limitation that was measured in a sitting condition pre and post when this restoration perhaps already happened. So that's why we cannot make too big conclusions. Okay, and that's why we need new dimensions, and that's why we implemented also MoBI technology in this study. To end up, I'll show you some very fresh recordings. So that's something that was actually ending today. Mansa was completing the measurements this morning, and we were running this bed rest campaign for a month and a half now. What we were measuring, here you can see a subject walking while typing on the phone, so you see that the head also tilted a bit in front. So he needs to basically repeat or type the text that he sees above. So walking while typing and then measuring high density EEG and whole body kinematics. This is done pre and post bedridden or bed rest of 10 days for older adults and 21 days of young adults. In addition, we measured also the static conditions, so participants are basically placed in bed, and on the day 1 we measure here the contrast change versus the expansion of these circles. So the hypothesis is that if the subjects are bedridden, they are not getting this constant flow of information or visual. So when we are walking through the space, you are actually perceiving this information constantly. Where you're exposed to bed rest, you're static for 10 at least days. So we want to see what's happening over there from sensory motor integration point of view. So we are recording high density EEG, bipolar EMG in this case, and then they are responding to this change on the screen, either with the lower limb or with the upper limb. And now we will be able to compare both modalities together. Unfortunately, it would be too nice to be true to present any results today, since we finalized the measurements in the morning. Okay, the last thing I wanted to show you, it's the upgrade, and this is how Mansa is resting during bed rest. We implemented this year an additional intervention where we programmed a VR-based environment. So those subjects, half of them were exposed to the leg extension training. So basically they won't be, or they didn't move physically, but just mentally observing and trying to get this kinesthetic feeling of leg press during prolonged bed rest. The hypothesis is that those subjects will be losing less muscle strength compared to those the passive ones in those 10 days. And okay, this training was happening every day. It was done by Luca this time, and yeah, that's why I hope to be convinced enough, or it was convinced enough for me to start with the mobile brain body imaging. That's why we are moving from static conditions towards mobile ones, trying to understand and trying to increase this ecological validity. Having said that, as Klaus already invited you, from 2nd to 5th of June, we are organizing together a conference, so feel free to join. Thanks a lot.